hope nobody like twists my words to be like, booktubers hate books with plots. All right, testing. Well, it's dark again, so welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Coming at you from a unexpectedly snowy night here in Seoul. Snow was not on the forecast, but it's welcome. It's beautiful. I had a struggle today. We're gonna be talking about struggles. We're talking about slumps in this video, so I feel that I need to share how I got here today. This morning, had a lovely appointment at my dentist. Love my dentist. They have an impeccable collection of children's books in English because they are geared towards English-speaking children. Why do I go there? Because I'm an English-speaking child. I forget that I have a very strange relationship with anesthesia. Fellow redheads, you know what I'm talking about, but I constantly forget. And so my mouth was like drooping and numb for much longer than anticipated. So I couldn't film when I thought I was going to film. And then my neighbors, which I knew this was going to happen, they warned me ahead of time, but my neighbors are doing some kind of intense home renovation, which this afternoon sounded like they were drilling directly into my home. Like I was actually scared for the roof of my home. So needless to say, couldn't film at that point either. Now it is dark and snowing, and so we are going to talk about books to get you out of a reading slump. 2024 wasn't my best reading year. I felt like I was kind of in a slump for for most of the year. And when I personally talk, I feel like everybody has a slightly different definition, but when I'm talking about, for me, having a reading slump, it usually means that I am reading, but I'm just not liking anything that I'm reading. I'm DNFing like crazy. When I do my wrap-ups, I tend to talk about my DNFs if I get to like the 30% mark, but a lot of times I'll read like a chapter or two, and if it's just not connecting, I'm like, not today. I'll return to you some other time. For me, that's like when people are like, you say you're in a slump, but you still read 10 books last month. I'm just constantly trying anything, any book. I'll pick it up, and if it doesn't work, I will immediately move on to the next one. Some people just like don't want to read for large swaths of time. And that's also a very sad slump to be in, especially when you like want to read, but you just like aren't connecting. I talk about this a lot, but I find for me personally that reading, it's a very similar experience to a magic eye. If you know those puzzles, very 90s kid moment here, but there are these kind of optical illusions where they're like these patterns on a page, and if you hold them up to your face and then kind of pull them away slowly, something clicks in your brain. I don't know how it works, but it becomes a 3D image that you can like turn around. Even if you move the page, you can still see it. For me, that's what reading is like, if I'm on it, if I'm really enjoying a book, the words just become an image. Like I'm so visual. And so when I'm not connecting with a book, it just feels like the words are in front of me, but the part of my brain that tells me that I'm enjoying the book, or at least connecting with it, you know, I don't need to enjoy every book, but at least engaging with the book, it looks like a nonsense pattern. So how do we get out of that? Long intro into some of my tips, some of my hacks for getting out of that horrible little lump of time where nothing's clicking. Okay, I have divided it into a few different categories. Within each category, I have a couple examples, but I hope that the just like general category helps you out. Number one being, and this came in clutch with me last month, so that's why it's the first one, and that is I turn to retellings. And not just a retelling, if you like a movie and you know it is based off of a book, go read that book, because I find that sometimes my reading slumps come from a little bit of mental fatigue. And so if you already know the story, whether it's you're reading a retelling of a story that you know well, or if you have watched the movie and now you're reading the book version of it, your brain knows what's going to happen. And I find that that helps me sink into a plot better if I'm in that kind of mental fatigue state. So, for example, over Christmas, I read The Price of Salt, which is the original book that Carol, the movie, was based on. And that one stays pretty true to the plot. So I very much felt at times that I was just watching Carol, and it was very easy. Some of my retelling recommendations for you. Number one being Most Ardently. This was a fun one from last year. It is a Pride and Prejudice retelling if Lizzie Bennet was a trans teenage boy. And it was just really sweet and funny. Obviously, you can question the historical accuracy of it, but there were actually some things that I learned through that book, and it stayed pretty true to the Pride and Prejudice plot in terms of the side characters. So yeah, it was a really fun time and wholesome by the end, for sure. Most Ardently. And there are so many Pride and Prejudice retellings. So many. Next up is a fun one, Forest of Dreams and Whispers. This is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but in such a fun, weird way. It is sort of if you were to mash up The Cruel Prince and Sleeping Beauty. I know that doesn't sound like it could be mashed up together, but the character dynamic was very Jude and Carden. But I thought the world and the curse and who is the hero and everything was really just fun. And if you've been striking out with the kind of enemies to lovers fantasies that I personally love, Forest of Dreams and Whispers hit. So, another one that was fun is The Wild Huntress. It's a retelling of a Welsh tale that perhaps you might not know, but it has the perfect rhythm of a classic fairy tale. And so as I was reading it, I just felt so, there was this nostalgia to it, but it was like hearing it for the first time. And it has a very, it has a polarizing ending. Let's just say that. I'm still not sure how I feel about it. I will definitely be rereading it, but it was a fantastic time. Characters were really easy to fall in love with. I appreciated at least that it left me in a place that I did not think we would end up, albeit very confused. So, The Wild Huntress. Next up, I have two that are inspired by the same fairy tale. Both of these are based off of the Grimm brothers fairy tale called The Six Swans. Six Crimson Cranes. Had so much fun with this. The Six Swans is about a family where there are six brothers, one daughter, and the brothers are put under a curse that turns them into swans, or in this case, crimson cranes. And the daughter has to go through these horrible trials in order to save her brothers. And it was just really a wonderful duology. This one is kind of also in the background of Chinese folklore. So there are dragons under the sea. The food described was so good. I just had a really wonderful time. I loved the story and how it was based on saving brothers. There is romance to it, but everything she does in this book is related to her family and her love of her brothers, and I found that that was always a refreshing take when we have usually everything is for romantic love. So yes, Six Crimson Cranes, also recommended, but I'm not sure if I can recommend this one if you're in a reading slump because it is heavy and long. But I personally really enjoyed Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marier. Speaking of just classic fairy tales, the way that she writes is so beautiful. Same story. We have a girl and her six brothers. Her brothers are cursed. She has to go through just endless trials and tribulations in order to get her brothers back. This author does not hold back when it comes to not delivering a 100% happy ending. So there's a lot of trauma and a lot of things that happen that I was like, why? So like I said, and also I think it's something like 600 pages. So maybe put that one aside for after your reading slump, but definitely Six Crimson Cranes. It's a young adult duology as well, so it just went down so easy. I recommend. Okay, I know I already said Forest of Dreams and Whispers, but I have two more recommendations in this section, and they are both Sleeping Beauty retellings. I don't know why. I don't particularly love the Sleeping Beauty tale, but I love authors who come in and try to twist it around. So like I said, Forest of Dreams and Whispers, but I also want to recommend a Spindle Splintered. This is a very short fantasy and it is so refreshing. It's about a girl who is, I believe, terminally ill. She's in the modern non-fairy tale world, but because of her illness, she has really latched on to the story of Sleeping Beauty. And what a twist that she actually ends up somehow falling into this kind of fairy tale world. And it's one of those stories that's so funny because the main character is from modern day. She speaks very much like a Gen Z kind of character. And then we have this other cast of characters from this fairy tale world of a unknown time, but very much not technologically advanced. And we're dealing with a princess who is very sheltered, okay? It is funny, it is short, it is sapphic, and it is a refreshing retelling of Sleeping Beauty. I had a lot of fun with it. There is a next book, but I'm honestly keeping that in my back pocket for when I'm in another reading slump. And this is by Alex E. Harrow, who can write in so many different voices and just does it so well. So that is a Spindle Splintered. And then last but not least, even shorter than that, my last Sleeping Beauty retelling is Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher. This is not the last you will see of T. Kingfisher on this list. Thorn Hedge. Thorn Hedge is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty from the eyes of the person keeping our princess in the tower. Okay, we follow a fairy who it's her only mission in life to guard the tower and make sure nobody gets in. We follow her through literally centuries of trying to protect this tower. And one day this pesky knight who's like, it's my job. There's a tower. And he is really persistent. He will not give up. And so we go on that little adventure and it was just, T. Kingfisher can do no wrong in my eyes. And like I said, it was very short. I actually read this on a trip. For me, I like to sit down and be absorbed in a book for like hours at a time. And when I'm traveling, I don't really have a chance to do that. So this was a really wonderful book where I could finish it in like one night, coming home from travels, get to the hotel room, finish a great book. So that is Thorn Hedge. And speaking of short books, our next category is short books. Do not, if you are in a reading slump, don't pick up that book that's over, I'm gonna say 300 pages. Don't do it. It probably won't work out for you unless it's a very specific genre that we will cover in this video. Short books. I bet you think I'm gonna talk about 6 Deaths of a Saint by Alex E. Harrow, which is one of the best short stories I've ever read. Well, you're right. So I'm not gonna go into it, but just look it up, okay? 6 Deaths of a Saint, 30 pages, 35 pages. Okay, but I've said too much about that one. So instead, I will recommend Untethered Sky. This is by the same author as the Jade City trilogy, the Greenbone trilogy. I adored this. If you like fantasy, but what you really love are characters that you cannot forget, this is really a great one. We're following a girl who is training her kind of griffin-esque creature. She is a soldier and her job is to train and bond with her creature. And you know what? It ends in a way that you might not expect. And I cried. And I think about it a lot. And I fell in love with our 3 main characters because I'm going to say the creature is our character. It was wonderful. That is Untethered Sky. Another short but not so sweet one is Mickey 7. Bong Joon-ho and Robert Pattinson are teaming up to make a film version of this called Mickey 17. But Mickey 7, think of Andy Weir, but make him have no hope for humanity. Like, you know how his books always kind of, they're like funny and a little sassy, but they always end with hope. Yeah, no. This is dark in a hilarious way. We're following a man who is part of a space mission to like help find other places that humankind can, where we can live in the universe. And we need a human to do a lot of tests on. Like, okay, we've tested on the rats. It seems like they are able to breathe the air, but like, what about humans? push Mickey out without a mask. So he dies a lot, but we're able to reincarnate him, like reprint him basically. But there's a little kerfuffle with that, and we get thrown into chaos. And, you know, it was just fun from beginning to end. If you're looking for a short little piece of sci-fi to pull you out of a reading slump, Mickey 7 did that for me, 100%. And then trying to picture him as Robert Pattinson, just icing on the cake. Speaking of very short sci-fi, if you haven't read All Systems Red yet, do it. If you're in a reading slump, if you love sci-fi, if you love sassy characters that just sort of hate the world, give this one a try. It's about a murder bot, a robot that is supposed to be used for like war, murder, etc. But instead it is now being used as a like security guard, bodyguard for rent. And our specific murder bot is babysitting a team of researchers as they try and scope out this new planet that they're looking to rent. And shit hits the fan. And our murder bot would really prefer if shit didn't hit the fan, because they really just want to sit around watching reality TV that they illegally downloaded because they technically broke their like government chip that is supposed to make them have no feelings because they're a robot. Well, let's just say it's messy and it's fun, and the ending is so good, and I don't know how I have held myself back from continuing the series. I think it's truly just that I know I want them to exist in the world without me having read them yet, you know? Like, I don't want to read them because then I can never read them for the first time again. So, All Systems Red, teeny little book. Enjoy. Now, if you need fear to jostle you out of a reading slump, a short and very scary book for some reason, I need to reread this. I'm talking about Annihilation. I read this in 2015. I remember it so distinctly, in a New York City apartment in a horrible heat wave during summer. And I just remember sitting on the couch reading this book, being so scared that I had to put the book down and like take in my surroundings to remind myself that I was in New York City and not in the middle of a jungle. This is about a team of researchers who go into this particular Area X, I think it's called. This piece of land that is exhibiting some strange, just some strange stuff is going on there. And every research team, whether it has been the military, whether it has been researchers like scientists, whether it has been rhythmic gymnastics, I don't know, they sent everyone. And no one has come back, except for one team. And when they came back, something wasn't right. So we are following the next crew that goes in, and yeah, I don't know what it was about it, but I just got the chills reading it. And there is a film that's pretty okay. They changed a bit of it, but it helped me. The film actually helped me visualize, because the book gets a little wacky, to say the least. Annihilation. Scare yourself out of a slump. Another really cute one that was short that I personally loved the year that I read it, and I ended up reading, I think, all of the books in this series. Half a Soul. I feel like a lot of people, like if people have read it, they praise it. But I feel like I don't hear about it as much as I thought I would for how good it was and how specific its audience is. This is a fairy tale. We have a girl who is from birth. I forget what exactly happens. She makes a deal with a fairy. Something goes on where half of her soul is taken. And so she lives this life where she kind of maybe doesn't feel things the way that the people around her do, or, you know, she doesn't react correctly or whatever. And it's all set in Regency era England. So she's pretty convinced that she's not really going to be on the marriage market. But when her beloved cousin goes out for the social season, our main girl follows her and gets wrapped up in a very interesting, sad, but eventually heartwarming story. And something about it was so easy to read. You get connected to the characters really quickly. And there's just that fun backdrop of a very Bridgerton feeling to it. And then there's also fairies. Like, it just really had everything that I wanted. And it was short, easy to read, half a soul. I also want to give a shout out to one of my favorite reads of the year for last year, which is Foster 80 something pages, you will cry. Takes place in Ireland, where a girl's family is just too big, too many mouths to feed. Her mother is pregnant, doesn't want to deal with all of the kids in the house, so she sends her daughter to live with her aunt. It is... That's all I gotta say, okay? Foster, 80 pages, do it. And then this one I threw in at the very last minute, so I don't remember how long this book is. One of the things I also love to do when I'm in a reading slump is return to books that I read as a kid. And so the first book that I thought of immediately for this kind of section is The Giver. This was required reading in 4th grade for me, for sure, and I think we even read it again. Like, I feel like I just read The Giver so much. The Giver is about a society that has a lot of very strict rules. It is a quote-unquote utopia, but how does a utopia exist? Does someone need to carry a little bit more weight? Do we need to give up some things? Are those things worth giving up? It is, really great. So kind of think about the books that you really loved. Like, I got like a bunch of comments on my bookshelf. I have a Nancy Drew book. Read a Nancy Drew if that's what you were into. Read a Magic Tree House. Like, just because you are whatever age you are watching this doesn't mean you can't backtrack all the way to a picture book. I found this in a used bookstore in Japan. This is the Japanese version of My Father's Dragon. Am I unlocking any memories for people? All I remember is he brings a bunch of tangerines to this island and just eats and eats and eats. Anyway, books like this, books that you loved as a kid, pick them up. That always just gets me back into the act of reading itself. Usually that resets my brain. There's one book, let me know if you know this book, because it's something that I think about all the time. I read it probably to the point of it falling apart, my paperback copy. It's called In the Stone Circle. It's about a girl whose father is some kind of professor and she has to move back to Scotland for a bit. The house is haunted. I believe her mother passed away, and I don't know. That's one book that, like, I'm gonna look if I have it in my house back home. But yeah, I want to read some of the books I read as a kid so badly. So that is another great tip. The Royal Diaries books, the Dear America books. Anyway, grab your favorite book from your childhood. It'll help. Next category is cannot look away from the page. Originally, I was just going to write thrillers, and then I realized that there are so many books that just gripped me that are absolutely not thrillers. They might be thrilling. Yeah, so these are the can't look away books, okay? I do find, though, that thrillers are a great way to kind of bump me out of a reading slump. The first one that came to mind that I read sometime last year is called First Lie Wins. This one I didn't know what to expect, but I actually had a really good time with it. It's about a girl who is undercover, and yeah, I can't say much more than that. It was a good time. It had me turning every single page, and I think I read it in a day. So get your hands on a thriller and enjoy. After that, so this is an example of not a thriller, but one that I couldn't look away from. If you haven't heard of this book, welcome. Glad to see you've come out from under the rock that you live under. Blood Over Brighthaven. This pulled me in different ways at different points, and that's what made it such a can't look away reading experience. At first, you're drawn in because our main character is trying to become the first official, like, high mage. We are living in a world with magic, and there has never been a female mage at her level before. And we're dealing with all of the hardship that comes with that. But then so many other things get introduced, and I was drawn in, like, just the magic system itself was really interesting. It was very much like programming, in a sense. And then the story just continues from there, and I can't say much more. Couldn't look away. That is Blood Over Brighthaven. After that, okay, this one happened very recently, so I feel like that's why the cut is fresh, where I am still, like, my heart is still racing from this book. And it was also just very heartwarming and sweet, and I fell in love with the characters so quickly. That is The Hollow and the Haunted. It was on my list of favorite books of the year, actually. I think it really took me by surprise. I went in expecting not a whole lot. We are following our main character who his family works with curses and prophecy and ghosts. And what happens when he sees the ghost of a boy that he knows is alive and well, also is like his enemy, all right? Family feud goes way back. We don't talk to this boy. But our main character is big enough to feel a sense of responsibility for this boy. The fact that he has foreseen his death, and they work together to try and figure out if they can stop this from happening. And it is just a fun time. I was so... It's happened so many times that it shouldn't hurt as much as it does every time, but I was not expecting it to be a duology. So the last 50 pages were traumatic for me, to say the least, because I was waiting for the story to be wrapped up, and no. So you will get a bonus with this one, because not only will you be hooked until the last page and you will have a fun time, but now you also have something to look forward to in 2025, which is the next book, The Hollow and the Haunted. Fun. Oh, next up, I'm so glad that this was like a community favorite. I feel like all of us really connected with this one a little bit unexpectedly, and that is The Unmaking of June Farrow. The Unmaking of June Farrow. How do I explain this? The joy of reading this is not knowing what you're gonna get into. So we follow a girl who, for generations, the women, the mothers in her line, have all succumbed to a kind of, for lack of a better word, insanity. And when our main character starts to notice signs that this might be happening to her, we follow her on a bit of an adventure. She gets a mysterious letter in the mail. Who doesn't love that? And unexpectedly, so heart-wrenching. I didn't know what was gonna happen for 99% of the book. I didn't know what I wanted to happen for 99% of the book. It was one of those, I just felt torn in all directions. I assumed no one's gonna be happy by the end of this book, and it was great. So, The Unmaking of June Farrow, edge of your seat the whole time, but also your heart will hurt. And I kind of want to read it again. Kind of need to reread that one. The Unmaking of June Farrow. Sorry I was vague, but I'm doing you a favor. Another book that I couldn't put down until the last page, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. This was, speaking of heartbreaking, but also such wonderful timing to be reading this, okay? This follows a girl who is living in Syria, even though she is only, I think she's like a pharmacist, okay? Like, she's not qualified to be doing what she's doing, but because she has some kind of medical background, she's working in the hospitals, just trying to help anyone who is injured in the devastation that was happening in Syria, performing surgeries without anesthesia on children. I mean, rough things, okay? She is staying here to take care of her best friend slash sister-in-law, but when she meets our main boy, who is so sweet, they start talking about leaving, and it's this really interesting argument of, what do you do when your home becomes so dangerous that you can't stay there anymore? But if nobody stays, what happens to your home? I mean, I'm like tearing up just even thinking about it. It was a stunning debut, and currently we have seen Syria go under some extreme changes just at the end of last year. Like, the author dedicated this book to her fellow Syrians and this hope that in someone's lifetime they might be able to safely go back home. And it looks like in this lifetime, in her lifetime, she will. And it's just, if you're gonna read it now. Like, it is, I don't want to cry. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, could not put that down. And then last but not least, switching gears totally for a book I couldn't put down because I was so frightened, The Slade House. I feel like I talked about this a lot when I started this channel, and I just haven't returned to it. I feel like it deserves a reread, actually. The Slade House is so trippy and creepy. It's about a house that appears every once in a while And anytime someone goes into it, they never come out. And we follow the story of one person who goes in. And it felt almost like something I might have read before. It felt very like creepy, grim, fairy tale-esque. There are these villains that kind of remind me like of, you know, the witch or the queen or whoever she is in Narnia. Like they felt so similar. Like I've met these people before, but the actual story is so different, and it was such a fun time. I love David Mitchell's writing, so the Slade House was one that I was glued to just because I was creeped out. And I recommend, if that's what you need for your reading slump. And now for our final section. I didn't know what else to call this other than read some fun books, okay? I find that reading slumps often happen to me when I have attempted to read a book that it's just not, my mental capacity is just not there. And that's okay. I think that I felt a little bit of pressure to push myself to read, for example, like more classics. I tried to read East of Eden. I'm gonna finish it. That's my goal for this summer. It's gonna be my summer read. But when I started it, it just wasn't the time for me. In terms of just things going on in my life. I was traveling, had a lot of work, etc. And me pushing myself to read a book like that, it just wasn't working out. So I give myself full permission, especially when I have a lot of work to do, the mental load is heavy, read some fun books. And I have a lot of them. Starting with, remember when I said this wasn't the last of T. Kingfisher? Paladin's Grace. Paladin's Grace. I believe this was one of my favorite books of 2023. T. Kingfisher is so talented in that she can write terrifying horror. What was it called? The Twisted Ones? I still think about that book all the time and it gives me the creeps. But then she can write laugh out loud, funny, fluffy fantasy romance that is just such a good time, that makes you cry. I love the characters to death. I read all of them. I still have one that I haven't read. So I kind of have all of the plots jumbled in my mind, but Paladin's Grace is about a group of soldiers. So there are all of these different gods. Each god obviously has a group of different followers. And for this particular god, I think it was like the god of war. Of course, its followers were soldiers, these paladins. But what happens when their god dies? What do you do when the thing that you pledged your entire life for is just gone? So we're dealing with this character that his meaning of life is just sort of not there. And so he's stumbling around doing random shit basically. And one of these jobs kind of brings him face to face with this woman that he ends up saving and then just is stuck in his life. Makes you want to cry. Hilarious. Bumbling older people. She writes characters that are in their 30s or 40s falling in love and being like having crushes, you know, and feeling like, where am I supposed to put my hands? You know, like just wonderful. So if you are looking for a fantasy romance that is just, so fun, Paladin's Grace. And then you've got, if you like that, you've got 5 or 6 I can think of by T. Kingfisher that are right up that alley in the same world. So Paladin's Grace. Another fantasy romance that I think is laugh out loud hilarious is Thrown in the Dark. I love this author's writing. She's so funny. She gets me. I don't know what it is. This is a story about a villain born and raised to be a villain, but he accidentally has a heart of gold. And he tries so hard to be bad. And what happens when, during a quest to be super bad, whatever the hell, he runs into a woman and they accidentally get stuck together. It's a trilogy. As the story continues, it goes completely off the rails. But the first book was wonderful. And if you're willing to just like not give a shit about the plot and genuinely ask yourself like, where am I? How did I get here? Thrown in the Dark. So fun. And this one I'm not going to talk too much about because I should have mentioned it when I was talking about the retellings. The Princess Bride. Have you read The Princess Bride? I haven't. I plan to actually in February. That's my goal. Fun books equals, for me, romantic comedies. So the 2 that came to mind immediately and ones that I remember laughing out loud and eating up in pretty much one sitting. The first one being The Queer Principles of Kit Webb. The reason that I am picking this one out of all of the Cat Sebastian books that I love is that this one is pure fun. This one is no plot. She says it, okay? The author herself is like, plot? Question mark. This takes place in the 1600s, 1700s maybe, in England. We have a son of a lord who gets into trouble in some way. I am struggling to tell you anything about this book. The son of a lord has to do something shady, so he goes to the head of the local pub, eatery, cafe, whatever, and it just goes on from there. So stupid and so funny, historically inaccurate, but the character, the banter, like if I could bottle the way that their banter makes me feel, you'd never see me again. I love that book. Cat Sebastian, I love you. Okay, so that one is just like goofy doofy. If your brain isn't there to like fully, this sounds so bad. I hope nobody like twists my words to be like, booktubers hate books with plots. That's not the case, but sometimes your brain is tired and you just need something that is goofy. And if it doesn't really make sense, it's fine. The Queer Principles of Kit Webb. Another book that immediately came to mind that made me laugh out loud and I was hooked is The Charm Offensive. Really quickly, it's about the PD of a kind of bachelor-esque dating show who has to be kind of the personal handler for their newest bachelor. And all right, The Charm Offensive. I had such a good time with it. Simple as that. Easy. All right. I'm going to hit you with a nonfiction one. Okay. This is one that I remember reading in high school and I still think about it to this day. I had so much fun with it. I can quote sections of The Corpse Farm. You know what I'm talking about. Stiff. Oh yeah. This is about cadavers. I was big in high school. I was big into CSI and Bones. Stiff was wonderful. It talks about death in such a funny way. Like, it takes it seriously, but it's also like, you know what? We all do it. And like, when we die, our corpses stink and turn funny colors and blow up. As someone who, I teeter-totter between like being so overwhelmed by the thought of death that I try not to think about it at all, versus like, yeah, hell yeah, tell me about how you shoot paintballs at cadavers in order to find out blah blah blah. You know, I teeter-totter. And if you're okay with reading about death in a very funny but educational way, Stiff, I recommend. Also great for a reading slump, because if you just want to read one chapter, just read one chapter. I am so due for a reread of that for sure. And last but not least, the book that I just want to end with, because it is fun, it's not short, but it's a retelling, and you know what? It kept me on the edge of my seat to the point where I intentionally didn't continue the series until this year, because the final book will be coming out. I'm talking about Little Thieves. This is a retelling kind of Godfather Death by the Brothers Grimm. It's about a girl who is raised by the god of death and the god of mischief. Okay, she's the adopted goddaughter of death and fortune, but she's also a thief, and she may or may not have stolen someone's identity. We just go on a wild ride. I can't really say much more than that. I remember the writing style took me a second to get into, because if I remember correctly, she speaks directly to you, and also because she's stolen an identity, she is multiple characters at the same time, you know? So once you get it, once it clicks, it is so funny. If you're a person who loves, you know, what's that meme where it's like, my favorite trope is when we go from you're a nuisance, derogatory, to you're a nuisance, affectionately. That's what this is. She has some really excellent zingers at the poor boy who manages to cross her path. It was such a good time that I intentionally didn't read the sequel, and I await the final. Is it okay, hold on. Is it a trilogy? Yes, and it's coming out. Try not to look. Okay. It's coming out in April, so I'm gonna start reading it probably in March. If you want to read it with me, the whole series, what a fun time. Little Thieves. It just couldn't stop. I was rooting for everyone's happiness, except for, all right, not everyone. And that's where I want to end this. So thank you so much. Let me know what helps get you out of a reading slump. And I hope we're being nice to ourselves in terms of our reading goals. I personally don't set any reading goals, but I know that a lot of people near the end and the beginning of the year feel stress or disappointment or anxiety about reading. And I hope that you're not doing that. I hope that you're having a good time. I hope that you're starting the year with some good reads. So far, I've read books that are gonna stick with me for better or for worse. So, you know, memorable books, that's all I can ask for. Let me know what works for you. How do you get out of a reading slump? Are you in one? Can we send you help? What do you like to read? Can we give you recommendations? And what puts you in one? Also, for me, it's like mental fatigue because of usually outside sources such as work. But also if I read a book that really doesn't click with me, sometimes that can just turn off the switch in my brain that likes reading. And these have helped me turn it back on. So that is my list. I hope you're having a great day. If you're watching this, I am likely in the United States. So if you want to check up on my Instagrams, see what I'm doing, see if I'm in your neck of the woods, see if I'm hitting a bookstore near you, because I definitely will be book shopping while I'm home. I will catch you guys next time. Thank you as always for being here. Thank you for being okay with the bad lighting and the snow and the lip. Loved you always. Okay, sorry if I sounded a little frantic near the end, but I felt like I was talking for a long time and I'm really hungry. So yeah, I apologize. I'll be better prepared for our next video and I'll see you then, okay? Catch you later. Bye.